In the heart of Rome, faith is shaken to its core. A night, Gaius stumbles upon a deadly secret that throws the Vatican into chaos. As the city erupts in rebel lion, a fight for the soul of the church ignites. Gaius, thrust into the heart of the conflict, must navigate a web of deceit and forge unlikely alliances. With a fierce warrior woman, Anya, by his side, he must expose the truth and fight for a church free from corruption. But a powerful king looms on the horizon, threatening to engulf Rome in a holy war. Will Gaius and his allies be able to defend their city and restore faith, or will Rome fall to the forces of tyranny? Journey to the Celestial. Written and produced by the Zillion Pro, Chapter 1. Sir Gaius, Knight of the Holy Order, knelt on the worn flagstones of his chamber. The room, carved from the thick walls of a remote monastery, offered scant comfort. A single candle sputtered, casting long, flickering shadows across the stone walls. Outside, a relentless wind howled, rattling the lone window and seeming to seep into the very bones of the ancient structure. Despite the chill, a different kind of coldness gnawed at Gaius. It wasn't the bite of the wind, but a growing unease that had settled in his gut like a stone. Rumors, like smoke tendrils, had been curling in from distant lands, whispers of a growing darkness within the Holy See. Tales of pronouncements from the Pope laced with arrogance and pronouncements that strayed from the teachings of their faith. Gaius was a man of reason, a man who valued loyalty and obedience. He had dedicated his life to the church, his sword sworn to protect it. Yet, these whispers, these flickers of doubt, refused to be quelled. He pictured Pope Clementine, a man who had once exuded piety and wisdom, now shrouded in a veil of uncertainty in Gaius' mind. Heaving a sigh, Gaius rose, his joints creaking in protest. He paced the narrow chamber, the worn leather of his boots whispering against the stone. He yearned for something more concrete than whispers carried on the wind. He craved evidence, a truth he could hold in his hand, not just a gnawing disquiet in his soul. Suddenly, a flicker of light caught his eye. He whirled around, hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his sword. But there was no enemy, no glint of steel in the dimness. Instead, a soft, otherworldly luminescence emanated from the corner. It pulsed gently, like a beating heart, drawing Gaius closer. As he approached, the light coalesced, forming a figure draped in shimmering white robes. Its face remained obscured, shrouded in a gentle luminescence. Fear, an icy tendril, snaked up Gaius' spine, yet a strange sense of peace, an inexplicable calmness, settled over him. Sir Gaius, a voice echoed in the chamber, soft yet powerful, resonating not just in his ears but in the very core of his being. There is a darkness rising within the Holy See, a corruption that threatens the very foundation of our faith. The revelation struck Gaius like a physical blow. He stumbled back, his mind reeling. An angel? Was this a divine visitation, a figment of his troubled sleep, or something more sinister? The figure continued, its words weaving a chilling tale of a pope seduced by power, of pronouncements that strayed from the path of righteousness. It spoke of a coming darkness, a storm that threatened to engulf the church. But within the storm, a flicker of hope remained. You, Gaius, have been chosen, the angelic voice declared. You possess the courage, the unwavering faith, to challenge the darkness, to embark on a journey to uncover the truth and expose the corruption at the heart of the church. Gaius stared, speechless. Chosen? Him? A simple knight, more comfortable with the clang of steel than the whispers of angels. A surge of doubt threatened to drown the nascent hope kindled by the angelic words. But how? He finally managed to croak, his voice hoarse. How can I, a single knight, stand against the might of the Holy See? The figure smiled, a warmth radiating from its ethereal form. You are not alone, Gaius. Forces both seen and unseen will guide you. Trust your faith, your courage, and the whispers of the wind. They will lead you to the truth. With those words, the light intensified, momentarily blinding Gaius. When his vision cleared, the figure was gone. Only the faintest echo of its luminescence lingered in the air, a testament to the extraordinary encounter. Gaius sank back onto his knees, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The weight of the revelation pressed upon him, a burden heavier than any suit of armor. Yet, amidst the doubt and fear, a spark of determination flickered. He had been chosen. He had to act. The wind howled outside, no longer a harbinger of unease but a clarion call. It carried the whispers he had dismissed before, whispers that now seemed to hold a new meaning. They were no longer mere rumors, but a path, a direction. Rising to his feet, a newfound resolve hardened his gaze. He was a knight of the Holy Order, sworn to defend the faith. And now, he was on a new mission, a mission that could shake the very foundation of the establishment. Chapter 2. Days turned into weeks, a monotonous cycle punctuated only by the gnawing disquiet that had taken root in Gaius' soul. The angelic visitation, a memory both terrifying and exhilarating, echoed in his mind. Yet, he wrestled with the very notion of its divinity. Could a mere knight, a man who found solace in the clang of steel and the camaraderie of his brothers in arms, truly be chosen for such a monumental task? He confided in Father Thomas, the monastery's aged priest and his closest confidant. The priest, a man whose weathered face held the wisdom of countless seasons, listened intently as Gaius recounted the events of that fateful night. When he finished, a long silence filled the room, broken only by the rhythmic crackle of the fireplace. Finally, Father Thomas spoke, his voice a low rumble. "These are not mere dreams, Gaius," he said, his eyes filled with a knowing glint. "They are visions, omens sent by a higher power." Gaius shook his head, a flicker of doubt flickering across his face. "But how can you be sure? Visions? Angels? These are things of legend, not reality." The priest chuckled, a dry rasping sound. "The world, my dear Gaius, is a far stranger place than you might imagine. Faith is not just about blind acceptance of dogma, but about opening your heart to possibilities unseen." His words struck a chord within Gaius. He had always considered himself a man of reason, yet the encounter with the angelic figure had undeniably shaken him. Perhaps, he thought, there was more to faith than he had ever dared to believe. As days turned into weeks, a new torment began to plague Gaius' sleep. Dreams, vivid and unsettling, invaded his nights. Images of a once gleaming Rome, now shrouded in an unnatural darkness, flickered behind his eyelids. He saw the once pious Pope Clementine transformed, his face contorted in a mask of cruelty and ambition. And amidst the chaos, a single, recurring image, a blinding white light, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. These dreams, coupled with the weight of the angelic message, gnawed at Gaius' resolve. He found himself growing withdrawn, his usual jovial spirit dimmed by the burden of his newfound purpose. His fellow knights, accustomed to his easy camaraderie, exchanged concerned glances. One crisp morning, as the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and pink, Gaius stood on the battlements of the monastery, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The wind whipped at his cloak, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth. He closed his eyes, the image of the angelic figure and its message flashing through his mind. "I cannot ignore this," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the wind's howl. "For the Sarke of the faith, for the Sarke of the church I hold dear, I must act." A newfound determination settled over him, replacing the gnawing doubt. He would embark on this perilous journey, whatever trials it may hold. He would uncover the truth, expose the corruption, and restore the church to its former glory, even if it meant defying the very institution he had sworn to serve. Chapter 3. The news arrived with the rising sun, carried by a weary traveler seeking refuge within the monastery walls. Pope Clementine, the supposed shepherd of the church, had declared war on the neighboring kingdom of Etherid, a land renowned for its piety and unwavering faith. This blatant act of aggression, a stark betrayal of the Church's supposed mission of peace and unity, shattered the fragile peace that had held within Gaius. The revelation was the final nail in the coffin of his doubt. Now, more than ever, the angelic message echoed in his ears. This wasn't mere political maneuvering, it was a power grab fueled by a corrupted heart. The war was a smokescreen, a way to distract the faithful while the darkness within the Holy See festered. Gaius knew this was his turning point. He could no longer remain confined within the monastery walls, wrestling with doubt and haunted by visions. He had to act, and he had to act swiftly. The weight of his decision settled upon him as he gathered his meager belongings. A worn map of the land, a few coins tucked away for provisions, and his trusty blade, inherited from his late father, were all he deemed necessary. He donned his weathered armor, the familiar weight a source of comfort amidst the turmoil in his heart. Bidding farewell to Father Thomas, Gaius felt a pang of sadness. The old priest placed a calloused hand on his shoulder, his gaze filled with understanding and a touch of apprehension. "Remember, Gaius," he said, his voice low and firm, "faith is your shield, courage your weapon. You are not alone on this path." The sun dipped below the horizon as Gaius rode out of the monastery grounds. The road south stretched before him, a ribbon of dust winding through rolling hills and dense forests. The once familiar landscape now seemed to hold a hidden menace, a reflection of the turmoil within him. He wasn't alone on the road. Whispers and rumors followed him like dust devils swirling on the horizon. Tales of discontent with the Pope's growing arrogance and the Church's straying from its core teachings were rife among the common folk. He encountered farmers burdened by heavy taxes levied to finance the war, their eyes filled with a weary defiance. He spoke with traveling merchants who recounted tales of opulent feasts held within the Vatican walls while the people outside starved. These encounters fueled Gaius' resolve. He wasn't just fighting for the Church, he was fighting for the people, for the very soul of the land. He saw a glimmer of hope in the defiance burning in their eyes, a testament to the true spirit of faith that still resided in them. Each night, under the vast expanse of the star-dusted sky, Gaius wrestled with his doubts. Was he a fool, a lone knight tilting at windmills? Was he truly chosen, or was this all a feverish dream fueled by his dwindling faith? But then, he would remember the angelic figure, its words echoing in the quiet corners of his mind. He would see the image of the blinding light, a beacon of hope in the darkness he dreamt of. And with each recollection, his resolve would harden anew. The road to Rome was long and fraught with danger. Bandits lurked in the shadows, preying on unsuspecting travelers. The harsh weather threatened to turn the journey into a desperate struggle for survival. Yet, Gaius pressed on, fueled by a purpose that transcended his own safety. He knew that when he reached Rome, he wouldn't be arriving as a conquering knight. He would be arriving as a lone dissenter, a voice crying out in the wilderness. But he also knew, with a certainty that surprised even him, that he wouldn't be alone. The whispers on the wind, the defiance in the people's eyes, these were the signs that he was on the right path. He was on a journey to Rome, yes, but it was also a journey to awaken the true spirit of faith, a spirit that resided not within the opulent halls of the Vatican, but within the hearts of the people. Chapter 4. Weeks bled into months as Gaius traversed the dusty roads towards Rome. The once pristine armor now bore the marks of his journey, dulled by dust and nicked by encounters with opportunistic bandits. His face, turned by the relentless sun, held a newfound grimness, a reflection of the burden he carried. The whispers he'd encountered on the open road intensified as he ventured deeper into the heartland. In bustling taverns and smoke-filled inns, tales of discontent with the Pope's growing authoritarianism flowed freely. He found himself drawn to these gatherings, drawn to the flickering candlelight illuminating faces etched with worry and a simmering defiance. One such night, huddled in a corner booth of a ramshackle tavern, Gaius found himself sharing a tankard of ale with a weathered old farmer named Tobias. The man, calloused hands gripping the mug, spoke of the crushing taxes imposed to fund the war, of food shortages plaguing his village, and a growing sense of disillusionment with the Church. They preached piety from their golden thrones, Tobias spat, his voice laced with bitterness, while we starve and bleed for their wars of vanity. Gaius listened intently, his own heart echoing the man's sentiments. He spoke cautiously, dropping hints about his doubts regarding the Pope's pronouncements and the war's legitimacy. To his surprise, his words were met with eager nods and murmurs of agreement. "There are others, Sir Knight," Tobias said, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Others who share your concerns. Men and women of faith who believe the Church has strayed from its true path." Gaius felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. He wasn't alone. There was a simmering resistance brewing beneath the surface, a yearning for the Church to return to its core values. As the night deepened and the ale flowed, Tobias introduced Gaius to a clandestine group of individuals who met regularly within the tavern's dusty back room. A young priest, his eyes filled with a youthful zeal, spoke of theological inconsistencies within the Pope's pronouncements. A grizzled former soldier, his arm bearing the scars of past battles, shared his disillusionment with the war's true purpose. In this group of unlikely allies, Gaius found a sense of camaraderie and renewed purpose. He learned of a network of dissenters scattered across the land, all yearning for a return to the Church's former glory. he realized that his journey wasn't just about defiance, it was about igniting a spark that could potentially rekindle the true spirit of faith. The following days were a blur of cautious meetings and whispered conversations. Gaius learned of a planned pilgrimage to Rome, a gathering of pious folk from across the land. He knew this was his opportunity. He could use this event to amplify his concerns, to expose the corruption at the heart of the church before a large audience. But venturing into Rome as a dissenter was no easy feat. The city, once a beacon of faith, now loomed before him as a potential death trap. The Pope's grip on power was absolute, his loyal guards a constant threat. Yet, the faces of the people he had met, their unwavering faith and simmering anger, pushed him forward. He entered the city gates under the cloak of twilight, a lone figure swallowed by the sprawling metropolis. The grand avenues and imposing structures that once inspired or now seemed steeped in an oppressive silence. Yet, amidst the looming shadows, a flicker of hope remained. Here, in the heart of the darkness, Gaius would make his stand. He would fight for the future of his faith, for the soul of the church, and for the very people who placed their trust in him. Chapter 5. Rome, the eternal city, sprawled before Gaius like a slumbering giant. Its once gleaming marble facades, bathed in the golden light of dawn, now seemed to wear a mask of indifference. He navigated the labyrinthine streets, his senses on high alert. Every hooded figure, every clinking of armor, sent a jolt of nervous anticipation through him. Gaius had shed his knightly garb, his armor replaced by the simple robes of a traveling pilgrim. He blended in with the throngs of pious folk converging on the city for the grand pilgrimage. The air crackled with a fervent energy, a cacophony of prayers, hymns, and excited chatter. Yet, beneath the surface, Gaius sensed a growing unease, a subtle discord he couldn't quite place. Following whispers gleaned from his encounters on the road, Gaius sought out a hidden tavern tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city. The air inside was thick with smoke and the murmur of hushed conversations. He found Tobias, the weathered farmer, amidst a group of similarly rugged men and women. Their faces, etched with worry and determination, lit up upon seeing him. "Welcome, Sir Gaius," Tobias rasped, offering a calloused hand. "We've been expecting you." The following hours were filled with hushed discussions. Tobias revealed a network of resistance cells operating within the city walls, a hidden army of discontent waiting for a spark. They spoke of corrupt officials within the Vatican, of whispers of dissent spreading like wildfire amongst the clergy. Gaius learned of the pilgrimage's true purpose. Ostensibly, it was a celebration of faith, but the organizers, a group of disillusioned priests and scholars, intended it to be a platform for dissent. Their plan, a public address during the culminating ceremony, a carefully crafted speech exposing the Pope's transgressions. A thrill of apprehension mixed with a surge of hope coursed through Gaius. He wasn't alone. A silent rebel lion was brewing beneath the very seat of the church's power. He offered his support, his voice a welcome addition to the growing chorus of dissent. Days turned into a feverish blur of preparations. Gaius, his identity hidden, mingled with pilgrims, subtly sowing seeds of doubt regarding the Pope's pronouncements. He spoke of inconsistencies in doctrine, of the war's questionable purpose. To his surprise, his words found fertile ground. Many pilgrims, their faith already shaken by recent events, resonated with his quiet dissent. Finally, the day of the pilgrimage arrived. A sea of humanity, a tapestry of colors and creeds, converged on the vast plaza before St. Peter's Basilica. The air thrummed with a potent mix of piety and anticipation. As Gaius stood amidst the throng, a cloaked figure pressed a small, rolled-up parchment into his hand. It was the speech, the catalyst for the planned uprising. A hush fell over the crowd as a procession of robed figures emerged from the basilica's grand doors. Pope Clementine, adorned in gold and jewels, stood at the forefront, his face a mask of practiced piety. Gaius felt a surge of disgust, the image of the angelic figure and its message flashing through his mind. This wasn't the leader he had sworn to serve. The Pope's address began, a droning litany of pronouncements filled with self-serving pronouncements and justifications for the war. But as his voice rose, a figure emerged from the crowd. It was the leader of the resistance, a charismatic priest with eyes blazing with righteous anger. He held aloft a hand, silencing the crowd. "My brothers and sisters," he roared, his voice echoing across the plaza, "We come here today not to celebrate the failings of our church, but to demand its redemption." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Pope Clementine's face twisted into a mask of fury. Guards surged forward, but they were met with a sea of defiant faces. This was the moment Gaius had been waiting for. He unfurled the parchment, his heart pounding in his chest. The speech began, a scathing indictment of the Pope's actions, laying bare the corruption festering at the heart of the Church. Gaius' voice, amplified by an unseen magic woven into the parchment, rang out across the plaza. Every word resonated with truth, igniting a spark within the hearts of the gathered pilgrims. As the speech reached its climax, a roar of outrage erupted from the crowd. The facade of piety crumbled, replaced by a storm of righteous anger. The seeds of doubt, sown by Gaius and others, had blossomed into a full-blown rebel lion. The fight for the soul of the Church had begun. Chapter 6. The plaza before St. Peter's Basilica erupted in chaos. Pope Clementine, his face contorted with rage, sputtered orders at his bewildered guards. The crowd, once a docile mass of pilgrims, transformed into a sea of shouting, surging bodies. The priest who had initiated the rebel lion, his voice hoarse but unwavering, continued his speech, his words fueling the flames of dissent. Gaius stood at the epicenter of the storm, the parchment clutched tightly in his hand. He felt a surge of adrenaline course through him, a mixture of fear and exhilarating anticipation. This wasn't the way he had envisioned his fight, but the die was cast, the truth had been spoken, and now the consequences would come crashing down. One of the Pope's guards, a hulking man clad in crimson armor, lunged at Gaius. Reacting instinctively, Gaius threw his shoulder into the attack, knocking the guard off balance. Adrenaline surged through him, but years of training kicked in. He recognized the flicker of fear beneath the veneer of bravado in the guard's eyes. These men were pawns, not true believers. The sound of steel clanging against steel filled the air. A small band of resistance fighters, previously concealed within the crowd, engaged the papal guards. Their skills, honed in secret, were on display as they danced around the cruder attacks of the guards. The tide of the battle, though seemingly one-sided, began to shift. Suddenly, a booming voice cut through the din. A cloaked figure, radiating an aura of power, emerged from the basilica doors. It was Cardinal Gaius, the Pope's most trusted advisor, a man known as much for his piety as for his cunning political maneuvering. Raising a hand for silence, he projected a commanding presence that momentarily quelled the commotion. "People of faith," he boomed, his voice surprisingly calm amidst the chaos, "there has been a misunderstanding. These accusations are based on misinformation." He gestured towards Gaius, a cold glint in his eyes. "This man," he declared, his voice dripping with disdain, "is a heretic, a deceiver who seeks to sow discord within the Holy Church." The crowd stirred, the seeds of doubt planted by the cardinal taking root. Gaius gritted his teeth. He knew the power of manipulation, the way the Church itself used pious pronouncements to mask its true motives. But he wouldn't let them silence him. He pushed himself forward, his voice rising above the murmurs. "Do not be fooled," he shouted, his voice hoarse but determined. "Look around you. See the pain etched on the faces of your fellow believers. See how the Church, once a beacon of hope, has become a tool for oppression." His words resonated with a segment of the crowd. Voices erupted in agreement, the initial shock and confusion hardening into resolve. The rebel lion, though momentarily faltering, refused to be extinguished. Cardinal Gaius, his mask of tranquility slipping, barked orders at the guards. The battle resumed, more ferocious than before. Gaius, caught in the maelstrom, found himself surrounded by a group of papal guards. Fear, a primal sense of danger, clawed at his throat. But then, he saw them. Emerging from the side streets were Tobias and the other members of the resistance network, their faces grim but resolute. They had planned for this. Their surprise attack pushed the tide back in favor of the rebels. The plaza became a chaotic dance of steel and shouts, the cries of the wounded mingling with the roar of the crowd. As Gaius fought, fueled by desperation and a righteous fury, he caught a glimpse of the Pope. Clementine, his face pale with fury and fear, was being ushered away by loyal guards towards a hidden passage within the basilica. Escape. With a surge of renewed determination, Gaius pushed through the fighting. He had to reach the Pope. He had to expose him, not just to the crowd, but to the entire world. This wasn't just about the rebel line, it was about dismantling the corrupt institution that the Pope had created. He fought his way through the throng, the cheers of the rebels and the snarls of the guards his only guide. He saw the entrance to the hidden passage, a narrow archway guarded by two hulking figures. He knew he wouldn't succeed alone. Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out, "Gaius." Turning, he saw Tobias, his face blooded but his eyes bright with determination. With a silent nod, they charged at the guards, their combined attack overwhelming the surprised men. The hidden passage lay open. Gaius and Tobias, hearts pounding, plunged into the darkness, the fate of the church, and perhaps the entire land, hanging in the balance. Chapter 7. The hidden passage plunged them into an inky blackness. The only light came from the faint glow of Gaius' sword, held aloft like a flickering candle. The air hung thick with dust and the stench of mildew. Tobias coughed, his hand pressed to his side, a crimson stain blooming on his tunic. "Are you all right?" Gaius hissed, his voice echoing eerily in the tunnel's suffocating silence. "Just a scratch," Tobias gritted out, his voice raspy. "We need to keep moving. Clementine won't be far." They pressed forward, the rough-hewn stones scraping against their armor. The passage dipped and twisted, a labyrinth carved into the very heart of the Vatican. The silence was a living entity, broken only by the rasp of their breaths and the drip of unseen water. Suddenly, a faint glow flickered ahead. Gaius shielded his eyes, his pulse quickening. The passage opened into a vast chamber, its walls adorned with faded frescoes depicting scenes of piety and sacrifice. A single flickering torch cast an eerie orange light across the room, illuminating a raised platform at the far end. And there, upon the platform, stood Pope Clementine. His robes, once resplendent, now hung limply on his gaunt frame. Gone was the aura of power that had surrounded him earlier. In his eyes, a flicker of fear battled with the remnants of arrogance. Beside him stood Cardinal Gaius, his expression a mask of controlled fury. He held a gleaming dagger, its tip pointed at the Pope's throat, a desperate gambit, it seemed, to buy time in the face of the rebel lion. "Gaius," the Cardinal hissed, his voice laced with venom, "you've come a long way for a simple knight." "A knight defending his faith," Gaius retorted, his voice steady despite the chaotic pounding of his heart, "and exposing a false shepherd." The Pope, his eyes flitting between Gaius and the Cardinal, spoke for the first time. His voice, surprisingly calm, echoed in the vast chamber. "Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding," he said, a hint of desperation creeping into his tone. "The war, the pronouncements, they were all for the greater good, for the protection of the church." Gaius scoffed. "Lies. You have used the church for your own gain, enriching yourself while your people suffer." Clementine's mask of contrition faltered. A flicker of his true nature, a ruthless ambition, flashed in his eyes. He lunged at the Cardinal, a desperate attempt to snatch the dagger. Gaius, anticipating the move, reacted with lightning speed. The dagger plunged deep into the Pope's chest, a crimson stain blooming on his white robes. A gasp escaped Clementine's lips, his eyes widening in shock and betrayal. Then, with a choked sound, he slumped to the floor, his lifeless body crumpling at the Cardinal's feet. A stunned silence descended upon the chamber. The weight of the moment, the sudden turn of events, pressed down on Gaius and Tobias. The tyrant was dead, but the battle for the church's soul was far from over. Gaius, his face contorted in a grotesque mix of grief and rage, spun towards them, the blood-stained dagger glinting in his hand. "You dare challenge the order," he roared. "You will pay for this blasphemy." Before Gaius could react, Tobias lunged forward. With a cry, he shoved himself between the Cardinal and Gaius, taking the full force of the dagger in his back. A choked gasp escaped his lips, his eyes widening in disbelief. Grief and fury surged through Gaius. With a guttural roar, he charged at the Cardinal. The ensuing fight was a whirlwind of steel and desperation. Gaius, a skilled fighter fueled by rage, parried and thrust with deadly precision. But Gaius, driven by a righteous anger and fueled by years of training, fought with a ferocity he himself hadn't known he possessed. The clash of steel echoed through the chamber, punctuated by Tobias' ragged gasps. The battle seemed to stretch into an eternity, each clang of metal a heartbeat in the tomb-like silence. Finally, with a desperate lunge, Gaius disarmed the Cardinal. The dagger clattered across the stone floor. Gaius, his face contorted in a mask of fury and defeat, lunged at Gaius, a desperate attempt to grapple him. The struggle reached its peak at the edge of the raised platform. They toppled over the edge, crashing onto the cold stone floor below. The impact knocked the wind out of Gaius, leaving him momentarily stunned. He blinked, his vision blurry. He saw Gaius, a few feet away, struggling. Chapter 8. Gaius pushed himself up, the world swaying around him. A dull ache throbbed in his head, a souvenir from his tumble down the platform. He focused on Cardinal Gaius, a few feet away, sprawled on the cold floor. The cardinal lay motionless, blood blooming from a head wound. Alive, but unconscious. Gaius stumbled towards Tobias, whose ragged breaths filled the otherwise silent chamber. He knelt beside his friend, a cold dread creeping into his heart. Tobias' eyes were open, but vacant, a film glazing over their once vibrant blue depths. "Tobias?" Gaius rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "No, stay with me." But Tobias wouldn't stay. A single tear rolled down his cheek, a testament to a life dedicated to faith and a tragic loss for the rebel lion. Grief threatened to engulf Gaius, but he forced it down. He had a responsibility, to the cause, to the people who believed in him, and most importantly, to Tobias' memory. He straightened, his gaze falling on the fallen pope. Clementine lay sprawled, his once proud face contorted in a final grimace. The sight held no satisfaction, only a chilling reminder of the cost of their actions. With a deep breath, Gaius set about securing the chamber. He disarmed the unconscious cardinal, tucking the dagger safely into his belt. He knew the news of the Pope's death, and the circumstances surrounding it, would send shockwaves through the Vatican and beyond. They needed time to solidify their control and present their case to the public. He looked towards the hidden passage, the way they entered. Emerging from the darkness were other members of the resistance network, alerted by the commotion. Their faces, etched with worry and grim determination, mirrored his own emotions. "He's dead," Gaius announced, his voice hoarse. "The Pope is dead." A collective gasp rippled through the group. The weight of his words, the enormity of their actions, settled upon them. They had toppled a tyrant, but at a terrible cost. One of the resistance fighters, a woman with fiery red hair and a battle axe strapped to her back, stepped forward. "What now?" she asked, her voice steady. "The rebel lion knows. The city will erupt." Gaius nodded. "We need order, not chaos. We need to secure the Vatican, prevent any loyalists from causing further bloodshed." He looked towards the unconscious cardinal. "We need to find a way to communicate with the rebels, to explain what happened here." The woman, whose name was Anya, took charge with a practiced efficiency born of years of clandestine operations. Orders were barked, tasks delegated. Some would secure the chamber, others would fan out to control vital areas within the Vatican. Gaius, his body screaming in protest, knew he couldn't rest. He emerged from the chamber, blinking at the sudden brightness of the hidden passage leading back to the basilica. The once sacred halls of the Vatican now held a strange tension, a sense of anticipation hanging heavy in the air. He saw guards, some bewildered, some cautiously approaching the commotion. Gaius knew he had to act fast. He raised his voice, his words echoing through the vast chamber. "People of the Church, we come not as enemies, but as reformers. The Pope is dead, a victim of his own ambition and corruption." His voice, amplified by the acoustics of the hall, resonated with a strange power. He spoke of the rebellion's cause, of the abuses of power, of the need to return the Church to its core values. He spoke of Tobias, a humble farmer who sacrificed his life for a cause he believed in. A hush fell over the gathered guards. Uncertainty flickered in their eyes. They had been trained to obey, but the events of the day had shaken their loyalty. Were these rebels truly enemies, or were they instruments of change? Slowly, tentatively, a few guards lowered their weapons. Others followed suit. The tide was turning, not through violence, but through the power of truth and a yearning for a better future. The rebel lion had taken the Vatican by storm, but the real battle, the battle for the hearts and minds of the people, had just begun. Gaius knew the road ahead would be long and arduous. There would be consequences, both from within the Church and from the outside world. But as he looked upon the faces of the wavering guards, a flicker of hope ignited within him. The seeds of change had been sown, watered by the blood of sacrifice. And Gaius, forever marked by this day, would stand as a symbol of that change, a knight who fought not for glory or conquest, but for the very soul of his faith. Chapter 9. Days bled into a tense week within the walls of the Vatican. News of the Pope's demise, along with the rebellion's narrative of his corruption, had spread like wildfire. The city of Rome was in a state of controlled chaos. Public displays of grief mingled with a simmering anger directed at the church's hierarchy. Gaius, hailed as a hero by the resistance fighters but viewed with suspicion by many within the Vatican, found himself thrust into a precarious position. He acted as a bridge between the two factions, attempting to maintain order while advocating for reform. The rebel lion had secured control of key areas within the Vatican City, but their power remained tenuous. Cardinals, some loyal to the previous regime, others wary of the uprising's goals, bickered and maneuvered for power. Anya, the fiery leader of the resistance fighters, kept a watchful eye on these internal politics, ever vigilant against potential betrayals. The biggest threat, however, came from outside the Vatican walls. King Regis, the ruler of neighboring Etherid, a man known for his piety and unwavering faith, saw the rebel lion as a sacrilegious act. He threatened to intervene, claiming to act as a defender of the church. Gaius knew Regis' intervention wouldn't be a holy crusade. It would be a land grab, a chance to seize control of the war-torn city-state. The rebel lion, despite its noble intentions, had unwittingly opened the door for another power struggle. A council was convened within the confines of a dusty Vatican library. Anya, her face grim, presented the latest intelligence. Regis is mobilizing his forces, she announced. He claims he's coming to restore order, but we all know better. The room buzzed with nervous murmurs. The resistance fighters, though brave, were outnumbered and poorly equipped to face a professional army. The cardinals, a self-serving bunch, offered little but empty platitudes and veiled threats. Gaius stepped forward, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "We cannot fight on two fronts," he declared. "We need to find a way to appease Regis, to expose his true motives to the people." Anya scoffed. "Appeasing him is surrender. These people won't stand for another tyrant." "I understand your anger," Gaius said, his voice steady, "but violence begets violence. We need a more diplomatic approach." His suggestion was met with skepticism, but after much debate, a plan was formulated. A delegation, led by a respected cardinal who had expressed sympathy for the rebellion's cause, would be sent to meet King Regis. Their mission, to expose the Pope's corruption and convince Regis that the rebel lion was not a threat to the Church's true teachings. Meanwhile, Gaius would focus on rallying the people within Rome. He would use the very platform the Pope had intended for his grand address, the plaza before St. Peter's Basilica, to speak to the public. He wouldn't just preach reform, he would expose the hidden documents unearthed by the resistance, proof of the Pope's greed and manipulation. The days leading up to the delegation's departure and Gaius' public address were filled with feverish activity. Scribes tirelessly copied documents, messengers scurried through the city, and hushed conversations filled the air. The weight of their actions pressed down on Gaius, a constant reminder of the precariousness of their situation. On the day of the address, a hushed anticipation fell over Rome. The plaza, once a gathering place for the faithful, now served as a stage for potential revolution. A vast throng of citizens, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and fear, packed the square. Gaius, clad in his worn armor, stood on a makeshift platform. The sight of a lone knight addressing the crowd sent a ripple of murmurs through the throng. He took a deep breath, the weight of the city's gaze upon him. "People of Rome," he boomed, his voice echoing across the piazza. "We stand at a crossroads. The Church, our spiritual beacon, has been corrupted from within. But fear not, for the truth is here." He held aloft a sheaf of documents, the stolen records detailing the Pope's secret dealings. His voice resonated with righteous anger as he recounted tales of embezzlement, manipulation, and a war waged for personal gain, not religious devotion. The crowd, initially stunned, erupted in a wave of angry shouts and cries of disbelief. It was a cathartic release, a shared outrage at the betrayal of their faith. But Gaius knew anger alone wouldn't suffice. "This isn't just about the Pope's misdeeds," he continued, his voice calming the crowd. "It's about the future of our faith. Chapter 10. Gaius' voice echoed across the vast plaza. We need a church that serves the people, not enriches the elite. His words hung in the air, igniting a spark within the crowd. A cacophony of shouts rose, a mixture of anger and a yearning for change. The revelation of the Pope's corruption had ripped away the facade of piety, leaving the faithful grappling with a stark reality. From the corner of his eye, Gaius spotted a contingent of city guards, their faces grim, their hands hovering near their swords. Fear flickered within him, a reminder of the delicate balance they were navigating. He needed to hold the crowd's attention, to channel their anger into a movement, not a mob. Raising his hand for silence, he continued, "We don't fight the church itself, but the corruption that festered within its walls. We fight for a return to its core values, to the principles of faith and service." His words found fertile ground. Among the crowd, whispers of agreement rippled through the throng. Many, burdened by poverty and disillusioned by the recent war, saw in Gaius a symbol of hope, a warrior fighting for a cause they believed in. Suddenly, a booming voice cut through the murmurs. A lone figure, clad in the ornate robes of a high-ranking cleric, emerged from the basilica. It was Cardinal Salvius, a man known for his staunch traditionalism and unwavering loyalty to the church hierarchy. His face contorted in a mask of fury, Salvius pointed a shaking finger at Gaius. "Heretic! You incite rebel lion against the holy institution. You are a blight upon the faith." A wave of anger surged through the crowd, but Gaius silenced them with a gesture. He met Salvius' gaze head-on, his voice firm. "Cardinal, the people are not blind. They see the truth laid bare. The church needs reform, not blind obedience." A tense silence descended upon the plaza. The clash between Gaius and Salvius represented the two conflicting factions within the city, those yearning for change and those clinging to the established order. Salvius, sensing a shift in the crowd's mood, shifted tactics. "We mourn the Pope," he proclaimed, his voice dripping with piety, "but the church will endure. We will investigate these allegations, and those proven guilty will face the consequences." His words were met with a smattering of applause, primarily from the guards and a few loyal parishioners, but the majority of the crowd remained unconvinced. The seed of doubt had been sown, and a simple promise wouldn't be enough. Taking advantage of the lull, Gaius pressed forward, an investigation by the very institution accused. The people demand transparency. They demand a council, a body composed of clergy and laity alike, to investigate these matters and propose reforms. A roar of approval erupted from the crowd. The idea of a council, a platform for the people's voice, resonated deeply. It was a tangible demand, a step towards change that resonated far beyond mere words. Salvius, his face livid, spluttered a response, but it was lost in the rising tide of voices. The momentum had shifted. The people had found their voice, and Gaius, the lone knight who had ignited the spark, stood at its center. News of the plaza address spread like wildfire throughout the city. The delegation, en route to meet King Regis, learned of the public outcry, the demand for a council. This new development complicated their mission. They could no longer simply present evidence of the Pope's corruption. They had to address the rising tide of rebel lion within the church itself. Meanwhile, within the Vatican walls, Anya and the resistance fighters watched the city erupt in a controlled turmoil. Their initial goal, to expose the Pope's machinations, had been achieved. But now, they faced a new challenge, navigating the unpredictable currents of public sentiment and maintaining a fragile order within the city. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the plaza, Gaius surveyed the sea of faces. The city remained divided, the future uncertain. Yet, there was a glimmer of hope, a newfound resolve in the eyes of the people. The fight for the soul of the church, far from over, had entered a new, more complex stage. Gaius knew this was just the beginning. The road to reform would be long and arduous, filled with political maneuvering, potential betrayal, and the ever-present threat of King Regis' intervention. But as he looked upon the faces of the faithful, their voices united in demand for change, a quiet strength welled within him. He was no longer just a lone knight, he was a symbol, a beacon of hope in a storm. The fight for the church's soul had begun. Chapter 11. The city of Rome simmered with a suppressed fervor. Gaius, transformed from knight to reluctant leader, found himself caught in a whirlwind of meetings and negotiations. The once sacred halls of the Vatican echoed with heated debates as the concept of a reform council took shape. Cardinal Salvius, stripped of his initial arrogance, became a master of political maneuvering. He outwardly supported the council's creation while subtly working behind the scenes to ensure a majority of loyalist voices. Anya and the resistance fighters, ever vigilant, watched these machinations with suspicion, their whispers a constant undercurrent in the halls of power. Meanwhile, the delegation's fate remained shrouded in uncertainty. News of the rebellion's growing influence and the demand for a council reached King Regis. His response was swift and chilling. He halted the delegation's progress, demanding their return to Rome. Whispers turned to murmurs of an impending invasion, a dark cloud looming over the fragile peace. One crisp morning, Gaius found himself summoned to the private chambers of a weathered old cardinal, known for his wisdom and quiet dissent against the previous regime. The cardinal, whose name was Matthias, greeted Gaius with a warm smile devoid of any political pretense. "Sir Gaius," Matthias rasped, his voice raspy with age, "you have stirred quite a tempest. Yet, a storm can bring change, both destruction and renewal." Gaius, weary from the endless negotiations, nodded in agreement. "We crave change, Your Eminence, but fear the wolves in sheep's clothing, those who seek to control the narrative." Matthias chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Salvius is a cunning fox, but not the only one. We must play a careful game, young knight. The council can be a weapon, but only if wielded wisely." He revealed a map of the city, dotted with symbols representing different factions within Rome's clergy and nobility. "We need allies," Gaius, Matthias continued, his voice firm. "Those who yearn for true reform, those who see the church as a beacon, not a tool." Gaius spent the next few days navigating the labyrinthine world of Roman politics. He met with devout priests yearning for a return to simplicity, with noble families disillusioned by the recent war, and with scholars whose voices had been silenced for years. He spoke not as a knight, but as a concerned believer, painting a vision of a church that served the people, not the elite. Slowly, a network of support began to take shape. Letters, penned in secret, circulated through the city. Banners, bearing messages of reform, appeared overnight on the walls of prominent buildings. The city, once a passive observer, began to take a side. Finally, the day of the council's inauguration arrived. The plaza before St. Peter's Basilica, once a stage for the rebellion's address, was now transformed into a bustling marketplace of ideas. Clerics from various sects, nobles clad in rich fabrics, and commoners in worn clothes jostled for space. The air buzzed with nervous anticipation, a potent mix of hope and uncertainty. On a makeshift platform, constructed for the occasion, Matthias stood flanked by representatives from different factions. Gaius, adorned in his armor, stood beside him, a silent guardian. Matthias raised a hand, quieting the crowd. His voice, though frail, resonated with authority. "People of Rome," he declared, "we stand at a crossroads. Today, we begin a journey towards reform, a journey towards a church that serves its true purpose." His words were greeted with thunderous applause. This was not just an assembly of power brokers, it was a representation of the people's voice, a force that could no longer be ignored. The council session began, a flurry of debates and proposals. Salvius, his influence waning, resorted to petty tactics. But the tide had turned. The voices of reform, empowered by the people's support, resonated louder than his hollow proclamations. As the council reached a fever pitch, a commotion erupted at the plaza's entrance. A rider, bearing the colors of King Regis, burst through the crowd, his face grim. He carried a message, a declaration of war against the heretical rebel lion within Rome. The news sent a shockwave through the assembly. The fragile peace had shattered. The fight for the soul of the church had entered a new, far more dangerous phase. Gaius, his heart pounding, knew this was just the beginning. The storm that Matthias had spoken of was upon them, a storm that would test their faith, their courage, and their very existence. Chapter 12. The declaration of war thundered through Rome, a tolling bell shattering the fragile peace. King Regis, cloaking his ambition in piety, had cast the die. Fear, a tangible entity, stalked the cobbled streets. The city, once abuzz with the fervor of the council, now held its breath, bracing for the coming storm. Gaius, standing on the battlements of the Vatican, surveyed the sprawling Ethelredian army encamped outside the city walls. Their banners, emblazoned with the golden griffin of King Regis, fluttered in the crisp morning breeze. He felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. The city's defenses were woefully inadequate, manned by a hastily assembled force of loyal guards and a smattering of resistance fighters. Within the council chamber, a tense silence reigned. Even Maviers, the seasoned cardinal, seemed shaken by the sudden escalation. The council, their discussions abruptly waylaid, grappled with the grim reality. "We cannot fight a professional army," a young priest stammered, voicing the fear gnawing at everyone's hearts. Anya, her face grim but resolute, slammed her fist on the table. "We cannot surrender either. This isn't just about the church anymore. This is about defending our city, our autonomy." Her words resonated with a fierce determination. The fight for reform had become a fight for survival. Gaius, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, stepped forward. "We fight not just for the city," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction, "but for the very soul of the church. We fight against a king who uses piety as a cloak for his own greed." His words sparked a flicker of defiance in the eyes of the council members. They were not a military force, but they were leaders, shepherds of their flocks. They could not stand idly by as their city faced annihilation. Anya, ever the strategist, began outlining a plan. They would use the city's labyrinthine streets to their advantage, harassing the Ethelredian forces with guerrilla tactics. The makeshift defenses, however inadequate, would act as a delaying tactic, buying precious time. But their biggest hope rested on the council itself. They would send a message beyond the city walls, an appeal to the people of Etherid, exposing Regis' true motives and calling upon their sense of justice. Days turned into weeks. The siege of Rome became a brutal dance of skirmish and siege. Gaius, leading the city's meager defense, fought with a ferocity born of desperation. Anya and her resistance fighters, ghosts flitting through the city's underbelly, harassed Etherid supply lines and sowed discord amongst the enemy ranks. Meanwhile, the council tirelessly penned their appeal. They spoke of Regis' hunger for power, his manipulation of faith for political gain. Couriers, disguised as priests and merchants, braved the dangers outside the city walls to deliver the message across Etherid. The response was slow, then a trickle, then a flood. Letters, smuggled back into the city, spoke of dissent within Etherid. Many, disillusioned by Regis' war rhetoric, questioned the true purpose of the siege. The seeds of doubt, planted by the council's message, began to take root. One day, a lone figure, draped in the crimson robes of an Ethelredian noble, emerged from the enemy camp, a white flag fluttering in the breeze. He was Lord Edgar, a man known for his pragmatism and quiet opposition to Regis' war. He sought an audience with the council, and within the tense confines of the chamber, he laid bare the growing discontent within Etherid. Regis, facing a rebel lion brewing within his own kingdom, was desperate for a swift victory in Rome. Negotiations began, a tense dance between desperation and hope. Lord Edgar, a reluctant ally, presented a solution, a duel between a champion from each side. The victor would determine the fate of Rome. It was a gamble, a chance to avoid further bloodshed. Gaius, recognized as the city's strongest warrior, was the obvious choice. But a duel wasn't just about skill, it was a test of faith. He would be facing a champion chosen by Regis, a man likely fueled by religious fervor and a twisted sense of righteousness. The news of the duel spread like wildfire through the city, a flicker of hope battling with the ever-present dread. On the appointed day, an arena was hastily constructed outside the city walls. The Ethelredian champion, a hulking knight clad in shining armor and wielding a massive warhammer, stood across from Gaius, his face a mask of fanaticism. Chapter 13. The duel began, a clash of steel and bone. Gaius, his armor dented and blooded, parried a thunderous blow from the Ethelredian champion. The man, a mountain of muscle named Gregor, fought with a brutal ferocity, his warhammer a whirlwind of destruction. Gaius, however, relied on his agility and years of honed skill. He danced around Gregor's attacks, seeking openings, exploiting the brute's predictable strikes. The roar of the crowd, a mix of fear and hope, echoed in his ears. This wasn't just a duel, it was a duel of fates, a battle for the fate of Rome. Gregor, frustrated by his missed swings, roared in rage. He launched a reckless attack, leaving himself open. Gaius seized the opportunity. With a swift movement, he disarmed the Ethelredian, sending the warhammer clattering across the dusty ground. Gregor, momentarily stunned, stood frozen. Gaius, his heart pounding, didn't strike for the kill. He lowered his sword, his voice straining above the stunned silence. "This isn't your fight," he declared, his voice ringing across the battlefield. "You fight for a king who uses piety as a weapon. You fight for a lie." A flicker of doubt crossed Gregor's face. He looked towards the Ethelredian camp, where Lord Edgar stood, his face grim. Then, his gaze fell upon the beleaguered city walls, where the citizens of Rome watched with bated breath. Suddenly, Gregor dropped to his knees, his massive shoulders slumping with defeat. He had been a pawn, a tool in the hands of a tyrant. The crowd, sensing his surrender, erupted in cheers. It wasn't a victory for bloodshed, it was a victory for truth. Lord Edgar, his face etched with relief, approached the arena. He bowed to Gaius, his voice filled with respect. "You have won, Sir Knight. Not just the duel, but a battle for hearts and minds." Word of the duel, and Gregor's surrender, spread like wildfire. The Ethelredian army, already facing dissent within its ranks, began to crumble. Morale plummeted, replaced by a growing sense of disillusionment. Soon, whispers of rebel lion within Ethelred reached fever pitch. Regis, his carefully crafted facade shattered, was forced to retreat. His army, facing dissent on two fronts, packed up their camp and vanished into the horizon. The siege of Rome was over. News of the city's liberation spread like wildfire throughout the land. Rome, the once beleaguered city, stood as a beacon of defiance, a testament to the power of faith and the unwavering spirit of its people. Gaius, hailed as a hero, remained humble. He knew the battle for the church's soul was far from over. The council, strengthened by their victory, resumed their debates with renewed fervor. The reforms, once just whispered hopes, began to take shape. Power shifted from the corrupt elite to the clergy and laity alike. The church, stripped of its worldly ambitions, became a place of service and solace once more. Weeks later, a grand ceremony was held in the plaza before St. Peter's Basilica. The city, adorned with banners proclaiming unity and faith, celebrated their hard-won peace. Gaius, standing beside Matthias and Anya, watched as a new pope was chosen, a man known for his piety and humility. The journey had been long and arduous, filled with bloodshed and betrayal, but as Gaius surveyed the joyous faces of the crowd, he felt a profound sense of hope. The storm that had threatened to consume the church had passed, leaving behind a renewed spirit of faith. He, the knight who had once fought for truth, had become a symbol of change, a testament to the power of courage and conviction. The echoes of steel from the duel had faded, replaced by the joyous hymns of the crowd. Gaius knew his fight was far from over. The scars, both physical and emotional, would forever be a part of him. But as he looked towards the horizon, a flicker of a smile touched his lips. There was still much to be done, but for now, Rome, and the church within its walls, stood strong, ready to face a brighter future.